So I've already done a reaction to the trailer in terms of purely the aesthetics. If you want to look at that, that should be available. Here I will be going into mainly the history and politics. If you're not interested in that, then this may be rough going. If you're okay with getting into the politics, well, proceed. So the trailer is making the Nazi threat into something really, really big. And I've studied Hitler now, I think, for 20 years, and Nazism in its various fashions. Now, in terms of the military history, I'm still slightly weak. But from the way I understand in terms of the nuclear weapons, no, they were pretty far behind. In fact, it's kind of ironic because Germany just had a massive brain drain. There were just so many people fleeing, including scientists, philosophers, physicists, poets. They lost a huge amount of people when Hitler came to power. So this doesn't strike me as accurate that they would be advanced enough to be a threat in terms of nuclear weapons. So their bomb program was pretty far behind. That's not to say they weren't a military threat in other respects. I'm not going to get into the Joe Rogan stuff about UFOs and alien technology. There is some evidence for that, but I'm going to proceed with that carefully. So they may have been advanced in other areas, but in terms of the bomb, no, the Nazis weren't much of a threat. They did have a huge time period to work with. Now, again, are we getting the actual historical record? Probably not, but it seems that we are getting an objective viewpoint. Or is this going to be totally from Oppenheimer's perspective? I can believe from his subjective perspective, he did think the Nazis were a major, major threat, and that's what motivated him to join the project, and that's why he was persuaded to do what he did. But as far as I know, in terms of historical record, it's sort of weak to say that they had to build the bomb so quickly to stop the war. I think you could call Oppenheimer fairly a pro-leftist. At the time, Roosevelt was alive, and I think he was confident that the bomb was going to be used wisely. There's also the problem that the way scientific knowledge was working, that it was already there. The potential to build the bomb came early, so in a way, it was inevitable. So there was a back and forth with the scientists that, well, it's going to happen and we want to end the war. Therefore, we have to do this within a certain time period. But I think Nolan is sort of playing with the historical facts to make it more dramatic than it really was, at least from what I understand. The trailer itself does seem to be focusing on the construction of the bomb, but I think we do have evidence from the IMDb that they are going to move beyond to the post-war period, because we do have Truman, and Roosevelt died, and of course Truman came into power, and we have Gary Oldman who's doing Truman. How much of this will be the post-war period, I don't know, but at least a little bit must be, at least at this point, because we've got Richard Feynman, and from the way I understand it, that Feynman, yes, did work on this Manhattan Project, but his role was fairly small. So if we're getting two versions of Feynman, the younger, older version, we have to be moving beyond the construction of the bomb. So the trailer itself could be deceptive, but in the way it's presenting that Hitler and the Nazis were a major motivation, I think that's there, but I think Nolan is stretching things out. I will say, though, the trailer ends with this ominous music and these kind of hearings, and although Oppenheimer wasn't immediately suspect, they did start to question his loyalties. Was he an actual spy for the Soviets? As far as I know, no. He was affiliated, yes, with these pro-communist groups. In fact, communists were working on the bomb. They knew about this, by the way. They did a lot of background checks, so they knew there were, quote, leftists and pro-Soviet scientists working on the bomb, because, again, at the time, Russia was an ally. But then the McCarthy period came in, and that became suspect. But during the actual construction of the bomb, the FBI and these other agencies were sort of aware of people's political loyalties. So I wonder how much Nolan will be doing on that, because it seems that, the way I understand it, Oppenheimer himself went through sort of three phases. There was an enthusiastic phase to build the bomb, then he was moderately optimistic, and then he became very pessimistic about controlling the bomb. But here it seems we're going from total optimism to total pessimism, which I don't think matches his actual biography. But again, this is Nolan. He plays with time periods, plays with perception and narration, so this may not be really a biopic. And I'm going to get the inevitable question, well, what about Dunkirk, and what's the comparison? Well, Dunkirk is more of a war film, And this appears to be a spy film, so it's more of a Hitchcock film, but from a Nolan perspective. So I don't know if Dunkirk is totally comparable, but I will look at Dunkirk because that is really his own historical film. He's done two historical films. He's done this, and he's done Dunkirk. He's done no other film with history. The other films have been totally fictional. They may use historical events, of course. I mean, basically the Batman films are done in the post 9/11 era. It acknowledges that, quote, the war on terror and the propaganda with the Bush administration, but it is still set in a mostly fictional universe. So these are his only two quote unquote films based on history. So we'll have to wait and see if they're at all comparable or if they're going to be completely different experiences. And that's where we are with Oppenheimer so far.